Hey there, Wargamers. Justin Paints here. And today, you guys are tuning in for another episode of the TNT Two Nerds Talking podcast. I'd like to welcome you guys back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in today. If you're new here, Alpha Strike that like and subscribe button. And with that said, let's get into it. Today, I have Calvin with me. This is Javasuko from Patreon and YouTube. And he has come down from BF Nowhere in Illinois. Is that right?
Outside Chicago.
Outside Chicago. So he's close to Adepticon. Got his Adepticon shirt, and even though they're moving now, so now it's further away from everyone. But he's been a long-time supporter of the channel, and this is his second time coming to North Carolina to hang out with me. And while he was here, I decided to Shanghai him for some content for YouTube, and he's agreed to be on the podcast and play some Battletech games with me. So that said, you want to introduce yourself? Anything cool you would like to tell people?
I'm Kelvin, Javasuko, hang out. I like to paint miniatures and roll dice.
Okay, so as with the previous episodes where I had Suge on, Eric, break down Javasuko. What does this mean? Because I call him Java. Everyone I meet online, I use their online handle because that's all I've used. So I know it's Calvin, but he is Java, and it might be interesting for the viewers unless you don't want to share.
Yeah, so it started in World of Warcraft, vanilla. I named all of my characters some sort of coffee-based drink.
Okay.
And so it just Java latte, Java smoothie, Java so on and so forth, until I ran out of things, and then I started using other language words.
But no JavaScript?
No, none.
See, I assumed that this was Java for coffee, JavaScript, and you told me you spent a lot of time at internet cafes. If you're watching this and you're under the age of something and you don't know what an internet cafe is, congratulations, you were born in a world where internet and cell phones existed. Because if you went to an internet cafe, you probably predate cell phones and internet. So that dates us a little bit, but I always assumed that Javasuko was from a play on words for coffee and your coding stuff.
Nope, this was just strictly coffee based because that's what I was always drinking at internet cafes or just wake up.
Okay. All right. So what does suka mean? Is that appropriate? Have I been saying like a Japanese curse word for 10 years?
No. So if I remember correctly, it is Portuguese.
Okay.
Some sort of like smoothie or that sort of drink.
Okay. So a coffee smoothie.
Basically. Yep.
So getting into, before we get into like the war game stuff, I think the internet cafe stuff is pretty interesting. What were you actually doing in these cafes?
Trolling people a lot. In vanilla World of Warcraft and
So you're playing MMOs at?
Oh yes.
Okay.
With people. We would do a lot of building out like a level 19 rogue just to go into the battlegrounds to kill people.
Okay. So you were, what they call it, twinking then,
yeah,
I think? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you'd find different breakpoints for different classes to do that in and like maximize your gear. Oh yeah.
So you're one of those people.
I was for a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I tried PvP in WoW, and the twink I think is the term they actually used. I can't break down why, but that's what I remember them using. So what he described, you'd go into a battleground, there'd be like one guy who's just king ding-a-ling because he max-minned everything he could, got the best equipment, and then stopped leveling, so he could just sit there and do PvP and stomp on your dreams all day.
That would be it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Did you do anything else there, or was it mostly just WoW?
We did a lot of Warcraft 3 Dota as well.
Yep.
So we'd get like left side, right side of the cafe set up with teams
That's
and stuff.
really neat.
We'd do Counter-Strike same way.
So
all those types of games, yeah.
kind of like, because you're at a cafe, like a business, but this sounds like the era and time where people would do LAN parties.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
In the internet cafe, you didn't necessarily have to rent the computer. You could bring your own and just get an open spot. So it'd be cheaper per time-wise because all you're doing is internet there basically, and not using their equipment.
So did you bring in, were you using like an old school laptop, or did you bring in a full like tower, CRT, keyboard, everything?
No, I'd always rent a spot and use their computer, their equipment.
Okay. So of the games you told me you've played, all those make sense. I never did Counter-Strike, never did Half-Life, which I assume if you played Counter-Strike, you probably did some Half-Life. I did RTSs growing up, but did you do any StarCraft at the cafe? Because I know you said you grew up, or you liked StarCraft stuff.
I like StarCraft, never did it competitively, just
Okay.
because I couldn't keep up with the movements.
Yeah.
Like Dota and Warcraft 3 was about as fast as I'd like to go.
Yeah. So I played, I've been playing League since Season 1. That's what came after Dota, because Dota was a mod on Warcraft 3. And then League of Legends basically took that and made a game mode. So I'm familiar with that. I couldn't do StarCraft. Even when I played RTSs like Command & Conquer and Red Alert, I guess Red Alert is Command & Conquer, sorry. When I played those kind of games, I would just play the missions. If I played online, I would just get dumpster dunked. League is a little different because I have to control one guy versus like StarCraft. If you play like everyone talks about the Korean servers and how they know all the micromanaging and all the stuff they're doing. Like I can't do that. I don't know the hotkeys. I could barely type on the computer, let alone know all the hotkeys and stuff. But it looks really cool. Do you feel like your interest in like video games also led you into wargaming, or was that a separate avenue?
Kind of. So very nerdy, antisocial kid.
Yep.
Part of computer club in late grade school, middle school, and whatnot. So I ended up getting computer components and old 70s, early 80s tech manuals for programming that I self-studied with. And because of that, eventually I fell into kind of an older crowd that was already into wargaming through family, friends, and acquaintances that way. So we ended up at Hobbytown, USA, and I'd hang out with these probably late 40s, early 50 guys as they played 3rd edition 40K.
Yeah.
And I remember that very clearly.
That's old school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have been pretty young at the time, because when I started 40K, it was around 2010, and they were just starting 5th ed. So it would have been 4th ed around the time I was in high school. So you're probably talking somewhere in the 90s, I would assume.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember going to the big convention that they had in Chicago, where you would literally get like a catalog of every part of every model.
Yeah.
And you could get, the left Thunderclaw of, this special guy and just that one part, and they would go run away and come back with just a little bag with the one part in it for you for like 75 cents.
Yeah, because you could buy bits back then. Yeah. Very different now, because back then the modeling and the hobby aspect of 40K or Games Workshop proper was much more of a focus. It's shifted. We've had this conversation a whole bunch off camera, because it's a thing that frustrates me with Games Workshop. But that was definitely like, I don't think it peaked then. It did shift when I was starting to play, but like it's peaked probably a decade ago at this point, though, where like the hobby and what they were pushing was here. Because like back then, predating me, you still had the thing I'll talk about from White Dwarf, the speed stick speeder, where they taught you or showed you in the magazines how to do mods to like kit bash something, and someone used a sticker deodorant and made like a land speeder out of it. They used to promote that kind of thing in the hobbying and the conversion, and it's not exactly what they do anymore. And they don't sell the bits, obviously, but that used to be a big thing.
Yeah.
So did you just play with their stuff, or is that where you would say you started in wargaming?
That's where I started. When I was learning, I was obviously, building, learning to paint and all that fun stuff from there. But these guys had been in the hobby already for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So they would literally just pull out an army and be like, here's your list, here's what it does.
Yeah.
Let's roll some dice. So that was always really cool. And I mean, they had, at that point, all the armies between them. And so it was, you got to pick and try, and they were very friendly and welcoming, and it was always a good afternoon to go do.
Yep. So we met in, I think, 2017 on Twitch. That's where he found me while I was painting, because I started painting on there. Assuming you were still into Warhammer then, once you got introduced to Warhammer as a kid, did you keep up with it, or was there like a gap where you just gave up wargaming?
Yeah, there was definitely a gap there. So I was in it for probably 3 or 4 years at the very start, painting and building those old school Space Marines. And then I kind of fell off in high school when I started working.
Yep.
And then community college and all that. It kind of went to the wayside, and I focused more on technology items.
Yep.
So I was doing a lot of self-learning with like Raspberry Pis and other technologies that they weren't teaching in school. And from there, kind of just life for a while.
Yep.
I caught you on Twitch probably within 3 or 4 months of getting back into it.
Yeah,
so
which
I
was right when I literally first started.
Yeah. right when I was getting the brand new Space Marine kits at that point, relearning how to paint, clean a brush, all that good
Yep.
stuff back then.
So what was there something that happened that made you decide you wanted to jump back into wargaming, or did you just feel it, or something you see something that was like, I want to be doing this again?
Yeah, so I don't know how I started getting ads for it, but I think it was the 8th or ninth edition release box that had come out, and I kept seeing it, and I was finally like, you know what?
Do you remember what was in it?
Oh,
Was it Dark Angels versus Chaos Space Marines?
no.
Okay. Because that was I know that one was a big one, because I think it was 6th edition Dark Vengeance.
Yeah, I think this was either 8th or ninth edition. Their big box. It might have been when the Primaris came out
Okay.
with the Jumpy Boys.
Because I know this was a little bit forward. It was once I was streaming out here, they put out the box set that had the Chaos versus the Standard Marines, and everyone was buying it because it had the little spider Chaos dude in it, and it had the Chaos Sorcerer guy with the bone mask thing. It had the Primaris on the other side. That was probably the one. That might have been 8th edition at the time, because they did that, and then they had the Dark Angels and Chaos Space Marines, and then they did the 2.0s right before I think they went to 9th. So it was somewhere in there. That might be the box, because I think that's the one that had the Primaris in it.
Okay.
I think, because I had a bunch of that one. Was it Indomitus?
Oh, the one with the Plague Drone.
Oh, so yeah. This one was after. That one was the one with the Death Guard in it.
Yep, that one. That was the box.
Huh. That still might have been Indomitus. I don't remember. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, because that was the introduction of some of the newer Chaos Space Marine kits, and they put out the drone, and then they came out with all the other dudes, and then they end up with Mortarion. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I started seeing ads for it, and I drove past a Games Workshop probably once a week that had opened up. So finally I was like, you know what, I'm just going to stop. And I rolled some dice in the store and walked out with a very light pocket and a very tall stack of paints and miniatures.
Easy to do. So whether it was early on or post, do you have like favorite armies or armies in particular that you really liked the aesthetic of or enjoyed how they played?
Yes. So it's part nostalgia and it's part just because I think they look cool. 13th Company for Space Wolves.
Yep. I asked this and it was a loaded question. I forgot I painted several Space Wolf characters for you.
Yep. You did. So the Wolfen particularly, and how in the lore they were trapped in the Eye of Terror, because I was playing through those games way back in the day. And how they had to basically scavenge like armor panels off of the Space Marine or the Chaos Space Marines they killed to patch together their armor to keep going.
Yeah.
So to me, that was very interesting and very creative for them to do to keep going, basically.
So liking Space Wolves is cool. Do you have like a particular memory from playing a game where something happened? You're like, this was cool. I'll never forget it.
I've got a couple. The oldest ones, it's probably just I was using I think it was White Scars, just bikes on the table, and they just
as they do.
were running everything. You'd move, you'd shoot, and you'd be out of the range of everything as soon as you needed to be.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun to kind of run around the table in that way without having to really worry about getting tied up.
So one of the this isn't necessarily my thing that I did, but it was in a group thing. So I used to play Kit Kringle, which you've been, but you weren't at the old location. The old location had like one 4x8 table, and that's what we had to play on. So we would do 2 small games on it or 1 big game. And it was lots of teams because we were all new to 40K. None of us had huge armies or money, so it was always like breaking into teams. One of the funniest things that I remember seeing happen, which is unfortunate for one player, but very fortunate for everyone else because it's hilarious. Dark Angels, Blood Angels at the time, things have changed. YouTube land, they could deep strike a Land Raider full of dudes because they're Blood Angels is what they do. And we were running a team game, and at the time, Tim, who's now the owner, at the time he wasn't, had a Basilisk artillery piece on the table for Imperial Guard, and one of our players had Cody as Inquisitor, and it was old Demon Hunter Codex. But he had an ability where if something deep struck within so many inches of him, you could nominate one friendly model, and they got to shoot that unit when it hit the table. He nominated the Basilisk artillery piece. It hit the Land Raider. It penetrated. It blew it up when it hit, and we're all just LOLing at this guy because the guy that it happened to also was like the cheesy grog. So he was playing at the time. It was like whatever the new hotness was for Dark Angels, Blood Angels, because he went from that to Sisters of Battle at the time because there was like some cheese competitive list. So he did that deep strike thing, and then you have like a almost 300-point tank full of Terminators or whatever he had in it, and they all died as soon as he hit the table. And it was very funny to see someone who, on a very unlikely roll, get their stuff nuked, and I'll never forget it because like he was frustrated, and we're all just like hee 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 because it's funny. So obviously 40K seems to be like the gateway for a lot of people. What games are you into now, and what like drew you away from Warhammer?
So I'm working more towards Battletech right now, painting some Steel Rift as well.
Shout out to Better Designs. Buy our stuff.
And lately with 40K, the real issue was turnover.
Yeah.
There'd be a new kit, the new hotness, and you'd have to play it to be competitive.
Yep.
And I couldn't build it, paint it, get it on the table for games when I do rarely get to play.
Yep.
So it's like now your focus is on making sure that if you get the chance to play, you've already got the new stuff and it's ready to go.
Yep.
Which just becomes kind of a never-ending time sink and money
You're
sink.
always chasing the tiger now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. That is basically as Java described it. It's kind of one of the main reasons I also backed away from 40K. When I started, the hobby was a big aspect, big focus, but they got to a point where the release schedule was just super rampant, and I don't get as much time to play. And so I'd be rushing to try and get as much done when I could, and then by the time I even got close to finished, it was obsolete now. Something new came out, or something got replaced, or a new book, because the rapid fire schedule. And then I'm like, well, I'm 80% done with these dudes, but now I shouldn't even be finishing these dudes. I should shelve it and get this, and then if you do that, they're not done. So I have my Firstborn Dark Angels are mostly almost done. And then I have Primaris that are probably 60 to 80% done, and they just kept pumping out so much stuff for both sides of that, or replacing parts of that I just got to a point where I was like, I can't keep up anymore. I don't have the bandwidth. And I feel like for some people that's probably still a struggle, especially if your focus is on the hobby, like being able to keep up with the release schedule, build and paint it, get it on the table before it's being rotated out to something else. Yep. And it felt like, for me, with Warhammer, it felt like it was turning into Magic the Gathering, except with Magic cards, you don't got to build and paint them. You just buy them, buy singles or buy packs. Whereas like with Warhammer, if I buy my Magic the Gathering equivalent to play my deck or my army, it's not ready to go when I buy it. Whereas Magic, I can walk to the store right now, throw down a couple $100 and do whatever I want to do. So I did not like that. Have you looked into any other games, or just kind of just Battletech and Steel Rift?
Just Battletech and Steel Rift. I looked at Infinity for a little while.
Minis look good, but that game takes a PhD to play.
Yes.
If you haven't got somebody to teach you, I have a lot of minis for Infinity, and I think the idea of it is cool. You need someone to teach you. It is so complicated, but the minis look really cool.
Yeah. The other one that's kind of on my list is the Fallout board game.
Yep. Was it Wasteland Warfare?
Yeah.
Yep. Models look good.
Yeah, it looks good. And they've got an Elder Scrolls one too, which would be interesting.
Yep.
But that's kind of down the line a little bit further.
Are there any minis for games that you're not interested in playing that you just buy to paint or want to paint?
I've got a stack of KDM, Kingdom Death Miniatures, for that.
Yeah. Yeah. YouTube may or may not remember me talking about that. There's a lot of tentacles in some of that, and yeah.
Yep, thick-thighed ladies.
Yes. There was a time when those minis were much more popular, and I got tired of seeing all the paint groups because it was always the same kind of thing, and it's irritating. But if you like it, you like it. Are there any minis particularly from that, or you just really want to paint the weird, what is it, body horror is probably a pretty good example.
Yeah, body horror. Like, I've got the Screaming Goat and the core set that I'm currently got pieced together and primed, so it's up there. They've got a lot of cool monsters for it.
Of the two of us, he also likes horror movies, and I don't, so it makes sense that he might also like these minis, but I just have to poke fun at him for tentacles and thighs.
Oh, and don't look back. I've got that.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
still
yeah.
on the paint shelf.
So big shout out to Blacksite Studios and their game Don't Look Back. It's like a 80s, right, like horror themed like board game.
Yeah, it's like if you popped in an 80s VHS and you watched kind of what you'd expect from that movie and the different parts, and It's a lot of fun. It's cooperative, so
Big fan of
very
co-op games.
competitive.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing with that, if you guys are ever at a show and you get the opportunity to check out Blacksite stuff, also some of our competitors, but we like them. They're good. Connor and Ben, and then Malev, which doesn't necessarily work for him, does a lot of painting for him and the design work. But if you get to stop by one of their booths, check out the packaging for Don't Look Back, because the way they have it on their shelves when you walk over, it feels like you're in like an old school Blockbuster or movie rental place, because the packaging literally looks like it's in a VHS box, and then you would open it and the minis game is in it. But they've got the branding on point that you hit you with the nostalgia, where you look at it like, that's freaking cool. So that's an interesting one to pull up. They're also a small indie company, so if you aren't into Steel Rift or our stuff, check them out, because they have a lot of small games, and supporting indie stuff is good, because GW's got plenty of money, but us small people don't. So cool. One kind of transitioning here a little bit. We've talked about minis, internet cafe, whatever. But some of the stuff that you have talked about with me since you've been down is some of the other nerdy things you do. Because Java has a background in IT, coding, and nerd stuff. What are some fun things you do that the average person might think is bizarre?
Electrical design. I built a lot of little circuit boards for side projects.
Yep.
So little power supplies to do all sorts of weird things. One of the things I was working on before the Nintendo Switch came out was taking apart Nintendo Wii's and using a backup camera as like the screen for it, and making a little Nintendo Switch basically. Hooking it all up with small wires and running it off of lithium batteries.
Wild to me. And you've told me this, but getting on the channel, I think it's cool. He also does some soldering stuff. What's your claim to fame for you with being excited about soldering? That's the smallest thing you could do.
So I can do a 402 package, or a little bit smaller than that. So I've got a whole hot air rework station, and it's like about the size of a grain of rice I can do.
So when you say hot air rework station, what does that mean? Because I'm a noob, and I don't know anything you're talking about.
So basically, it is like a little teeny tiny hair dryer. It's got like a station, and it comes up. And you use hot air to melt your solder and your flux, instead of actually touching an iron to it. So you can do it over a part of the board to more evenly pull off like full chips.
Okay, gotcha. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's anything about your interest in mechanical small nerd stuff that translates to the minis world? Why you like that? Is there like some overlap with the, like maybe it's like a dopamine dump or sense of accomplishment when you're doing something on minis versus something on these little circuit boards? Those are very different, but still like technical in some regard. Like, do you get the same feeling out of it? Is there some like translation you get?
I think it's the attention to detail that you need for it. With miniatures, especially as we keep going into the future, they keep becoming more and more detailed.
Yeah.
And so you keep getting smaller and smaller pieces that you get to play with. And I kind of get the same thing not only in work, but in the other side hobbies I've got with soldering and whatnot, where it's very much attention to detail. You have to make sure that you've got your commas in the right places and your periods where they need to be, so bad things don't happen.
Yeah. So for the tech stuff you do and the wargaming, I feel like everything we've discussed, you end up kind of like, you talk about self-teaching, and I feel like while you've been down, a lot of your time is also spent watching informative YouTube videos, whether that's investing or learning to code a thing or fix a thing, whatever. Do you feel like the mechanics of war games, your interest in that is also similar to your interest in other things, like how they function? Do you feel like you get into the minutia of digging into the rules as well?
Yes. So, and that probably goes back way back in the day too, with like World of Warcraft min-maxing.
Yeah.
Because you can do that with anything. You can build a spreadsheet, you can watch a video to learn the rules, and then kind of take it from there to the extreme.
Yeah.
And that can be very interesting and very fun, but there's also the scale with it, right?
Yeah.
If you want to go competitive in a game, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's expecting. Whereas if you're going more casual, it's, okay, maybe I want this group to very specifically fill a role on the battlefield,
Yeah.
so I'm going to min-max them for doing that role.
Yeah.
And then this other group, they're fun. I like how they look. I like that I painted them.
Yeah.
And older unit or, an Irby, right?
Not competitive, but you just want it because it's cool for whatever reason. Yeah. So that's one of the things about Battletech I really like, is that even the meme mech, like an Irby, is still lethal, whereas in Warhammer, the way they've done the rules, a lot of times there'll be a unit that looks cool and its rules are garbage, so no one plays with it, and then there'll be a unit that looks like crap, it's really good, but people play with it. So knowing where to min-max, but also knowing where, like, these are units I want to paint and play with, and there are some games where everything's viable, and there's some games where that's not the case. So we're talking about digging into rules and where like the coding and nerd stuff kind of like coalesce a little bit. You want to talk a little bit about a project you've been doing for DRD?
Oh, yeah, I've been doing a list builder for Steel Rift. So hopefully we can get that online so it's a little bit easier so you don't have to necessarily sit there with the rule book and try to figure out your attachments and what factions you've chosen or perks, and kind of just streamline that a little bit, make it a bit easier and a bit more fun for new people to get into it and kind of build a fun list that they're happy with.
Yep. When I first saw the preview of it, I was really excited because the list building aspect of Steel Rift is the most complicated part, and it's not terribly hard, but doing it by hand can be. And seeing all the drop downs, I was like, this is going to make this game so much more approachable. And then being able to play around with stuff, especially when you're like, do I want to take multiples of this weapon and it costs more tonnage, and just max minning your guy to find out what you want. Except in Steel Rift, there are a few builds that are actually pretty much one build that's like, even with the new stuff we put out, is really hard to deal with. But for the most part, if you like how a unit functions, it's going to function. If you're going to do missile spam where no one can see you, that is still very, very good. And it's a thing we've been trying hard to combat in the sense of not necessarily nerf it, but make other things more viable. So our most recent release, Close Quarters, was literally to make melee function. Melee worked in the initial rules as a side thought, an afterthought. You could just hit something. With Close Quarters, you can like if your mission is like, I want this guy to be a Gundam dude with a plasma sword and run around the table and hit stuff, you have the gear to actually make that a primary objective for that versus a secondary, maybe I'll do it. Doesn't necessarily help to mitigate the missile spam stuff, but we're trying to like bring other stuff up instead of nerf something if possible. So not sure if that'll be up at the time this video goes up, but once it's up, you guys should check out the list builder, especially if you've been on the fence with Steel Rift. That'll definitely really help. So for people that want to get into, let's start with like the tech stuff for as a hobbyist. Is there anything you would have as like a recommendation for like if you're at all interested? Here's a thing I would recommend to not necessarily like try, but like if I was interested in some of the stuff you're in, I wouldn't know where to start. So like giving someone a jumping off point for like if you're interested in tech stuff, here's the thing to look up. This is a good starting point.
YouTube videos, obviously, it's quick, easy, cheap. Shouldn't cost you anything. Yep. From there, there's like several different versions of Linux that you can play around with. If you get a 4 gig or bigger USB stick, you can just download the file and literally boot directly into it from your computer and play around with it. And then when you shut it off, you're back to Windows.
Okay, so it won't mess up your computer. Like I could do that at home right now, and it would not. Okay, interesting.
Yep. Obviously, you can't really save anything because it's just a bootable media. So typically you just get reverted back. But it's a great place to jump into it to learn and get some hands-on with it. And Linux has come a far way from what people are used to. Most people think it's all black screens and like green text still, like the Hackers movie in the 90s, which is a great movie. But now some of them with a GUI, it's no different than Windows. It's just got better security controls, and it'll require you to do a few extra steps, but they're there for your protection and all that good stuff. If you wanted to invest a little bit of money into it, get a Raspberry Pi starter kit. $60 or so.
Oh yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, comes with everything. I think Cana Kit is one of them that I've jumped into. And you get to play around with it. It's a little mini computer that you can fit in your pocket, and worst case, you could always turn it into a little emulator for like a Super Nintendo or something too.
Yeah. The stuff that I get bogged down watching on YouTube that's interesting for me is people taking old consoles and putting mod chips in them. And one that got me a few weeks ago was this company came up with a mod chip for a Super Nintendo. And I guess there were two different versions of Super Nintendo. One had like 2 chips or something on it, and one had 1, and it had to do with the graphical like processing stuff. And if you have the 2 consoles and you set them up next to each other, you can see the graphical fidelity of the one with the better chipset. Excuse me. Man, the monster. But if you have that one, like the graphics look good, but they also cost more. Like if a shop knows what they're doing, they're going to identify that by its serial or something, and they're going to charge you more for that console. But they came out with this chipset that's like, I don't know, 60 or 75 bucks or whatever, and you can put it into your OG Super Nintendo that did not have the better sought after chipset, and it is almost exactly the same visually on there. And I watch videos like that where I'm like, that console is 30 years old, and people are still making a modern thing for that. Oh, yeah. Or watching something with the PlayStation, Super Nintendo, watching someone take an Xbox, mod it, and then get on Xbox Live today on these private servers. All that's fascinating, but for me, when I look at like, oh, you need to solder that, and I'm just like, I don't want to break things. But it's fascinating because for some people that's a hobby. So this is very cool to me. And then when you told me you made the Nintendo Wii like Switch style console, I was like, that's fascinating because I would never know what to do, or I'd be worried I was going to break it. Because you would probably be competent, but for the average person, like, I'm going to invest all this to get these components for this console and then mess it up.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Nintendo Wii's, when I started, were like $30 at Goodwill.
Yeah,
so
they're cheap.
I was like, okay, even if I screw up, it's a small investment to start with.
Yeah.
The rest of the equipment I already had from other projects, so really it was just kind of a facet to get into.
Yeah. So transitioning over from kind of connected hobbies with nerd stuff, things like that, bringing it back to painting, is there a particular style of painting you like to do? Like, what are your thoughts on painting minis?
For me, it's more about finding a method for it to unify it. I'm not necessarily the most creative when it comes to paint schemes, and so I really like to go with like conical paint schemes because I know what panel should be what color and how to go. One of the big things that I get hung up on with painting is figuring out when I'm making a paint scheme, what panels I want what color on which model.
I see. Are there any particular techniques you like?
Not really. I kind of just go for the basic layer.
Okay. Are you using airbrush or your hand painting?
Oh, so I airbrush, primer, and then zenithal from there. And then if I can get away with a full base coat, I will. Otherwise, I'll try to mask and get whatever the majority of the model should be sprayed that way, just to save some time.
Yep, exactly what I do, especially when I was doing batch paint for 40K, exact same thing. Like, use the airbrush to put down whatever color is the most common color that needs to get the most coverage, or the hardest annoying color. Because if hand painting certain colors down is easier than hand painting white, because there's an appreciable amount of it, I sometimes will do that too. Do you have like a particular paint brand or tools that you like?
So I'm into Monument Hobby right now.
Yep.
I do have Scale 75. I really like that for glazing.
Their whole complete line, yeah. They're so Scale 75, for you guys who may not be familiar, sponsored by Monument. I love their paints too, but when I'm working on busts, I have some specific colors from Scale I pull out because I enjoy how thin they can get and how easy they glaze. Monument does that very easily too, but the Scale from the start, that's kind of what they want. So if you were trying to pick between paint brands, Scale is probably more of the upper end artist style thing you're wanting to do. If you're doing mostly minis, Pro Acrylic and Citadel is going to do just fine. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Otherwise, I do have Minotaur for the airbrush too, so that's easy to go to. You just dump it in the airbrush and it just works.
Right. Minotaur is the Badger airbrush, or Badger airbrush's paints. Airbrush, right? Yep.
So that's the main paint that I have. I've got a couple of just cheap oil washes or oil paints to make oil washes.
Yep. Do you have a particular airbrush that you favor?
Patriot 105.
Yep, that is my workhorse. Yeah.
Yep.
Did you do any mods to yours?
So I did the high roll trigger, and I think I've got a 0.3 needle in it.
So you're on the more detail side.
Oh no, then I'm wrong. Whatever is the largest, so I can just dump the primer and base coat.
So one of the standard ones you can get with the 105, I think, is the 0.5. I don't have the high roller trigger in mine, but I modified mine. They had, I think it's called a Velocity. They had an airbrush that has a cup at the top you can dump into, or it flips 360 and you can put a siphon feed in it. Okay. That came stock with a 0.7, so I pulled the cone and the nozzle off, put them on the 105 because they fit, and dropped the 0.7 needle in. So when I'm going to prime, we are slinging some paint. Oh yeah. So if you didn't buy that one, you probably got the 0.5, which is also good. The 105 is the most affordable airbrush that I have and is the most used. I've got from in the Badger line, I've got from the 105 to the Sotar 2020 and various ones in between. I've probably got between 7 to 9 brushes for them, and the 105 is my most used, followed by maybe the Chrome. I don't use the Sotar very much. And then I've got a couple of Harder and Steinbecks, and they're good, but they're very finicky. The 105 is literally like, that's like going outside and you've got your old beat up work truck that looks like crap, but you get in, it cranks every time. You want to load lumber or move something, you throw it in the bed, don't matter if it's scratched, it works. My 105 looks like it has been through hell, and it still functions. My Harder and Steinbecks look really pretty, and sometimes they don't want to work. So reliability versus cosmetics. So that's me. 105 is my go-to. So I've tried a few other airbrushes in between, but I've stuck with that one. I'm not a big fan of Grex. I've not had any good luck with those. Not sponsored by them, so there's that. And then I've tried, I think it was the Krios Mr. Hobby one that I got that Spray Gunner sent me to do a review on. And that one's actually in a hobby box. So one of the viewers from Patreon might have already got that because I did that. 2 of those boxes were a little bit more premium. One had an airbrush in it out of like the 20, and one of them had a wet palette in it. So somebody might have one. Do you have any advice for anyone trying to get into painting in terms of like just getting started or improving their skills, much like maybe how you approach the tech stuff or learning? How would you recommend that, or give them advice on like getting into or improving in painting?
I think for getting into it, go to Hobby Lobby, get a $5 brush pack. Don't worry about Rono, and just start putting some paint on the models. Just practice.
Yep.
That's really all there is to it. Don't worry necessarily if your lines are crisp or if your paint's thin enough or too thin. Find a brand that you like, and I'd probably suggest Pro Acryl, just because straight out of the bottle, you don't have to worry about thinning it or
Yep.
anything. It works.
Yep. And if you have a large enough needle diameter in your airbrush, like Austin here at the shop and Adam, 2 of the employees here, they just straighten the airbrush and go. I thin mine a little bit, but they have had success not doing that. So that worked out pretty good. Also, while we may plug Pro Acrylic, it's expensive for Citadel, but there's nothing wrong with it. That paint's good, and so is Vallejo, if you guys happen to get in that. Do you have any recommendations on how, if you were new to actually painting and you had the tools, if you wanted to learn something, like do you have any like favorite places for like tutorials? Obviously, I'm assuming some YouTube, but any channels that you enjoy watching that might be able to plug?
Miniac and John Ninas, and of course I'm on the spot, so I can't remember.
Yeah.
But Twitch as well. You'll find people on there, and Twitch is nice for interacting with people
Yep.
as well. You can ask questions in real time, and a lot of the times the people that are on there that are painting can explain more in depth on why they're doing
Yep.
it. So maybe you don't understand the color reason why they're undercoating their flesh with green and yellow, but then they can go through and kind of explain their thought process and the
Yep.
triads that they're using to make it look better
Yep.
as an end result.
Yep. One thing before we get too far from it, we were talking about tools, getting the cheap paintbrushes from Hobby Lobby. Sam Lenz is an award-winning artist, and he will literally take some broken bullshit paintbrush and paint a masterpiece with it. And while the tools can make your life a little easier, getting the core concepts for how you do a thing and a technique are more important. So you don't have to start by buying the most expensive stuff. Just start by building a good foundation, thinning your paints, doing multiple coats, and building things up. And then if you decide to buy more expensive equipment, that's only going to help you, but it is not required, because he'll take a $2 synthetic brush from the store, and he will paint as good as somebody with a $50 Klinsky sable. And that has a lot more to do with technique versus just the tools. So if you go out and buy the best tools, it's not going to equate to the best painting. So I think that was a really good thing to point into. On that end, is there any particular paintbrush brands that you like?
Winsor & Newton Series 7.
Okay. So I've got some old ones of that. Have you tried anything else since then?
I do have the Monument Synthetics
Yep.
as well that I like. Those tend to go pretty well, but you do, with every synthetic, you get the little hook at the end after
Yeah, they
you start
eventually
using
curve.
them.
Yep, yep.
But otherwise, yeah, that's about it. I've got the $5 Hobby Lobby packs too, so basing, or if I'm going to be lazy and not clean properly because I'm short on time or just feeling that way, I'll go with one of those so I don't have to worry about running into something.
Yeah, use the right tool for the job. So I'll recommend, like, if you're doing grungy bullcrap work with your painting, use that paintbrush you're willing to destroy. If you're doing high detail work, that's where you can pull out your more expensive brush. I've heard bad stories with the Series 7s right now. I've heard there's quality control problems.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't restocked in a while. I've used Artist Opus for a bit, but I've transitioned to it was like El Maestro or something. I think that's what it's called. They had some brushes I tried on a whim. They were on sale from like Jackson Art or something, and I've fallen in love with those. They're good. And then I still haven't put them through their paces, but I've got a bunch of Broken Toad as well. So Broken Toad I've heard is good, even though I haven't used them. And then was it Rosemary and Company?
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I did pick up Broken Toad at some point during a restock. I just haven't broken into them because I don't go through brushes that often. So.
So one of the issues that I used to have is doing commission painting, I would chew through brushes quickly. As I have gotten more proficient with painting and paintbrush maintenance and so forth, cleaning, my brush's longevity has gone up. So then I have these boxes of these really nice brushes that at one point I probably would have been chewing into quicker. Now I don't, because I'm not destroying brushes. So once you get good equipment and learn how to maintain it, you will get longevity out of it. So now I might have to pause as I try to figure out where we go.
That's fine. I could take a drink.
Oh yeah, you could have drank the whole time I've been sipping.
No, this makes a sound, and I can see it on the thing.
Oh, there's that.
Yeah.
So looking at gameplay mechanics, bring it back to the wargaming for a little bit. Is there anything from like 40K that you really liked and miss, or are there things with other war games like Battletech that you just like better gameplay mechanic wise?
I like Alpha Strike, specifically knowing how many hexes you move or something like that too in Classic, just because I find it easier that way. So you just count, you don't have to worry about inches and everything like that.
So you're talking about Classic on a hex
Yes,
map? Got
yes,
it. Yeah.
So it makes it easy. You know you're facing, you know, it's going to be one.
Yeah.
You're moving one, all that kind of stuff. So it can go a little bit faster in the movement phase than trying to do the measurement. And also there's really no way to get super competitive with that. Because if you're measuring, you know, you should measure from your base to where you're going.
Yep.
And sometimes people forget or move or shift things, and that can adjust it a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that just simplifies it.
And that problem also exists in any war game that's not using a grid. That's a problem. I noticed one of the things I like to do is front of base to front of base, and I'll notice people that like to do back to back, and I don't like that because then you exceed the ruler. And I like the idea if I put here, and then as long as my guy's behind the edge, I know I didn't exceed. So if you've got two players who measure differently on the table, it creates an opportunity or a situation where you might feel like it's not being done properly. One of the things I personally like about Battletech and some of the other games, because Legion is different too, with Legion having proprietary dice, and then like Infinities and D10 or D20s. I like in some of these games where there's your resolution for combat is quicker. So like in 40K, you have roll to hit, roll to wound. You got armor save, maybe, and actually rolling to hit might have a reroll. Wounds might have a reroll. Then you have armor save. Armor save might have a reroll. Then you might have feel no pain with a reroll, and then command points. And you get to a point where one resolution of combat with a handful could take a long time. Whereas in Alpha Strike in particular for Battletech, you roll, calculate damage, might have a crit, move on. Classic bogs down a little bit, but if you change the scope of Classic to a couple of models versus 12, it's not so bad. And then Infinity, the game's complicated, but there's not a lot of dice rolling, so your resolutions are quick. So that's one of the things that I enjoy. Of your time in wargaming, how do you think things have changed? Before I kind of like put the carrot in front of you to guide where I think I go, like seeing wargaming from a kid to now, what's your first thoughts on how it's changed?
I think it's become more competitive.
Okay.
I think with the release schedules and people always buying the new models, they're always playing them, so it's always the latest, greatest thing, and those rules are always best, at least in the 40K when I was exiting. Otherwise, I think a lot of the models have gotten better, going from white metal to the plastic, even if there's a little bit of mold lines and things that you have to clean up. It's more detailed, they look nicer. They're easier to work with in some aspects. They don't chip quite as easily as those old
the
white
paint
metals.
adhesion to plastic's a lot better than to metal.
Yeah.
Also, the metal might have certain durability benefits for like certain types of weapons, whereas like if you got somebody with a really dainty spear in plastic, it might break. But in general, the plastics are probably more durable in that if you knock the metal guy off the table, it's probably going to shatter at the seams. Whereas the plastic guy, the dainty weapon might break, but most of the models like Space Marines, if you knock it off the table, 99% chance you're probably fine. Maybe scuffed it. Whereas the metal, you're gonna cringe as soon as it falls. So I did not try and guide where you're going with that, but you mentioned the technology and the changes, which I think was good. In terms of additional like secondary benefits that people are using or the companies are using for wargaming, how do you feel about the technological changes there?
So I think social media has brought a lot of people closer because you're going around the world now. Like there are people that I talk to in the UK that paint miniatures that we chat about. We share pictures of what we're working on. But it also allows them to put out a lot more content. So YouTube, Shorts, Facebook, all that kind of live stuff as well, to generate hype and to kind of bring more people in, or at least bring people together. So I think that's really cool because back in the day, like when I started, learning to paint yellow outside of finding the right episode of White Dwarf, it was absolutely horrible.
Yeah, so pre-internet, you'll know this too if you guys ever look at old White Dwarfs pre-mainstream internet, social media, all that stuff. If you look at how many was painted, it looked XYZ. And then after that, it was ABC. It was very different, night and day. And that was because certain techniques that people knew, especially from what I had been told, there's a lot of things people did in the scale model, like historical stuff they were using to weather and do stuff for their minis that translated over to wargaming at some point. But there was a time where you would share that knowledge with a friend, but we didn't have the internet, so it wasn't there. So for example, when you see the meme about known oil being like liquid talent, there was a time where people didn't know what washes were. Companies didn't make washes, but there were people, like I distinctly remember Kit Kringle, Coy, the previous owner, his son, washes existed at this time, but he had grew up with his dad in actual like scale modeling. He made his own washes. And he had this weird thing. It actually used some kind of soap in it because it had something to do with the way that the stuff flowed. Wow. And he would make his own washes because he ostensibly learned that from his dad. And that was something that predated GW selling washes at that time. So you had a lot of stuff that at some point became mainstream that was just kind of an insider knowledge then. And now I think today the big thing is once people started to see using the Gundam panel liners, the oil-based panel liners for miniatures and then cleaning it up, that is the next easiest thing to get stuff done quickly. And being able to, proliferation, is that the right word? For knowledge with the internet. Like once someone gets a new technique, it's out there. Whereas before, it had to go into a publication and you may or may not see it. So, the internet's had a big impact. For someone who's into nerd stuff and coding, do you have thoughts on like list builders and apps, secondary things that companies have put out?
I think they're going to continue to become more and more prevalent, more and more useful. The problem I've got with it is keeping up with the rules changes when you've got groups that do that quite often. So if you're dropping a new rule book once a year, that's not that bad, especially if you're going to charge for it. But if you're doing a new codex or whatever every 3 months, and now you've got to do basically a software service type setup where you're paying monthly for an app, I think that kind of takes away from it because less people are going to be willing to do that. That's like, okay, do I pay the same cost for this list builder to get the latest rules and to build my list and to save them? Or, do I get Netflix instead and just not worry about it?
Yeah, 'cause you're competing with them. I think there's been a fundamental shift. I think the apps are good. They have value. I think, at least in this case, they're kind of punching on GW a little bit because they monetize everything. But I think a lot of companies have got to the point where they realize if we give you the core rules for free, that makes it much easier for you to want to buy our minis because that's one less thing you got to buy. Whereas GW will get you with the rule book, the codex, the supplement, the other thing, and all of a sudden you have a backpack full of books to play this game. And then the same thing with the app. You buy the physical, maybe you get a code or a discount code to put in the app, but then things change. If you get to a point where like Infinity, for example, their list builder, I don't know how well it works on mobile, but they have a list builder online that's free. Buy our minis, here's how you play with them. Because they're going to make the bulk of the money off the minis. So now an app itself is going to cost money in maintenance, but if that app was a loss leader where it's like, here's the rules for 40K, you don't get into the lore, it's just the core rules. If they took a loss on that app, but that got more people to play the game, they make that money up on the minis, but they still monetize everything. And then, like you said, keeping up with the app because the rules itself, keep changing. So now you have to do stuff and update it. Whereas if you get a consistent rule set, you don't have to update as often if you aren't changing as often. So that's a problem with GW. Before they sold back in their peak, I played War Machine Hordes. Okay. So they had an app, I think it was called War Room. The really cool thing with that one is it had your lists in there and you could do your list building, which was really cool. But if you and I played and we both had our phone or our tablet, we could connect. And then when you did damage, if I want to know about one of your units, I could click it and see it. It would pop up on my screen. So if I didn't own your faction while we played, I could still see your cards in my app. Okay. And that was really nice. And I'll ask questions when we play. I'll be like, how much damage this guy got, whatever. But in a competitive sense, especially in War Machine, and I was not this hardcore, but time mattered. While the opponent's going, especially if I don't have to see it, you could bring up the app and be like, okay, I know how much damage this guy's got, and you can start strategizing while they're going. That was really cool, and it functioned really, really well. Whereas other apps like GW's ones, like I think they're so worried about getting money off of it that like the functionality kind of goes. Yeah. But War Room was good. The other thing with War Room that was nice is they would charge you by faction if you wanted to, but there was one flat fee, and you had all of them for the duration of the edition. At the time, I think I was playing Mark III. When you bought that app, I think I paid like $50, $60 because like I always inevitably become a TO for something when I get into a game. Wanted to have everybody's stuff to see what it was. if they put out a new unit and you had it, you got updated. If they updated the whole army or the stuff for that edition, for the life of the edition, if you bought it, you got full access to all of the rules until the next edition came out. And then if once per edition and it's a 5 or 10 year cycle, I spend $50 or $60, it's not too bad. But with GW charging what they do for codexes and rules, it's like, it's not that. So
Too much turnover, too much money too quickly.
Yep. So as we start to kind of wrap up today, thoughts on how you balance your IT work life and your hobbies?
I definitely try to. Doesn't always happen.
Yep.
Doesn't always work. Time management is the biggest thing, though. You have to have time management in your life, whether it's work or personal, in my opinion. So I actually go through and I block out part of my calendar.
Yep.
And so it'll be an evening thing. It'll be, okay, I'm going to take 8 to 9 o'clock tonight. This is my paint time for this week. And when it comes up, I just kind of follow the calendar.
Yep.
So it really keeps me in kind of the groove from the start of my day, work, what meetings, whatever you've got. And then after work, dinner, get ready for bed or paint time. Whatever that schedule says, it just kind of guides you and makes things flow a little bit smoother. It also keeps me on track, I feel.
Yep.
If you've got free time, people will meander. They'll start looking at YouTube, going down rabbit holes, because I'm
doom scroll.
terrible for that. Yeah.
Yeah, we all are. And those apps are designed to keep you looking, so it ain't doing us any favors. Yeah.
Yep. But if you get a notification pop up that says, in 5 minutes you're supposed to be painting, okay, let me get up and go refill my drink, and I'll sit down and clean up my spot, and I'll start working.
Yep. So one of the YouTubers I follow, he does the same thing, but he super blocks out his schedule down to like the minute. Okay. So every day he's got, I have a business meeting, I have that, and this window, but it helps him stay focused and on track. Right. But it seems like mentioning, if you guys took anything from today's segment, time management might be the thing. I was trying to find something from these that are like, this is a good thing to grasp onto. But I struggle with this too. And then when I sit down to get through all of my work for the day, sit down at home after work, and I'm going to work on after work stuff, YouTube editing, whatever, then I have a time where I kind of want to paint. But if I had a set time, it's like, no, this is the paint time. Once this thing dings, stop, move on. That would probably help. But I get so bogged down in other stuff that it's like, it's just always working. So I'll sit there and I'll edit, and then I'll be like, well, I'm going to tonight, so my schedule's a little different. So I'll usually paint from like 10 to 12, and then I go to bed, get up about 8 o'clock. I'll hit 10 o'clock, and I'm in the middle of editing something like just a few more minutes, and then I look, and it's 11:30. I was like, no painting today. And then that happens every day. And then I'm like, well, I haven't painted anything in 3 weeks. So being able to block out your schedule and give yourself permission to do something else, I think is a good idea. Yep. So do you think that hobbies have in some way influenced your professional life and or vice versa? Has there anything, or have those been completely separate?
I think it's been there as a creative outlet. So day to day at work, I get some creative freedom with my job because you have a problem to solve, figure it out.
Yep.
So I get to creatively figure out solutions for it. However, there are days and times where it becomes very monotonous.
Yep.
And so there is no creative solution to a problem. It's a problem I've had in the past. I already know the solution. Just got to walk through the steps.
Yep.
Great. But then afterwards, I can have that creative outlet on how do I want to build this mech? How do I want to put this guy together? Try to figure out a paint scheme and slog my head against that.
Yep. Okay. So in closing, before we sign off today, is there anything you're excited about that's coming through the pipeline for minis, or anything you're excited to be doing, like for you, that's coming up?
Just finishing some minis. That's really the big thing that I've got coming up. I'm getting some time coming up here to just back away, be kind of a loner for a little bit, check some stuff out, and do some painting. So I'm hoping to finish some Authority factions. Nice.
Yeah, so talk about Steel Rift. When you came down, he had all of his hobby set up, and you've been here for almost 3 weeks now, and we've done zero hobby. Yeah. This is the first video we filmed, and he leaves in approximately a week. Actually, literally a week at this point. You will be on the road at this time in a week. So yeah, getting into the hobby would be good. Yeah, it'd be cool to see some hobby progress. So, and then I guess next time I will see you will probably be Adepticon in 2025.
Yep, so, up in Wisconsin.
Yeah, because I moved. There's going to be cheese, and then what was that beer they had? Spotted
Cow.
cow. So I'll get to have that one there too. So, but that's it. I think we have covered a bunch of things interesting. Thank you for coming out and agreeing to be on the podcast with me. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. As always, we try to find something that is the if you take anything, you got it. In this case, I think Calvin brought up a good point with time management, but also having someone else on the show with a completely different walk of life from everyone else and just seeing into like how they operate and why they like minis, I think is cool. So if you guys enjoyed, thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that stuff. If we said something dumb, let us know in a polite way. If we said something cool, tell us, because we like reinforcement. So, but that said, that is all we've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for hanging out. As always, keep painting your models, keep rolling your dice, and we will catch you guys next time. If you made it this far, you're probably a viewer that already hits that like button when you see a video come up. You're probably already a subscriber, and you probably jump into the comments down below to help support the channel, to help support that algorithm. But if you're looking for some other ways to help support the channel too, make sure you check the description down below. Maybe you want to pick up some paints from Monument Hobbies. That's my paint of choice. The Pro Acrylic line is chef's kiss, good stuff. Maybe you want to check out some of the offerings from Death Designs, where I work in my day job. We got plenty of 3D printed products, as well as MDF terrain, some of the stuff that I have designed myself and we play with here on the channel. And if you're looking to bolster your Battletech ranks, miniatures, and offerings, make sure you check out Bobby from Fortress Miniatures and Games. He's one of the main supporters of the channel as well, and supporting any of these companies helps support what I do and helps to ensure that I can continue to bring content to all of you. If you want to become a super supporter, I highly recommend you guys check out the Patreon. You guys give that extra little edge to help push more content out, and I really do appreciate that. And my ultimate goal on the channel is to continue to be able to not only put out the content we have now, but to get to a point where you can put out more content later, whether that be battle reports or painting tutorials or just more rambles, anything at all. I'd like to be doing more content for you. This is something that I enjoy. I like being able to cast a light into the darkness to bring a little bit of hobby positivity to all of you and make you feel good, and also enjoy playing games myself. As we do the final sign off here though, I do want to go ahead and switch on over and do the scroll of awesome to showcase all the Patreon supporters, the super supporters of the channel, to give them some recognition for helping support what I do. Thank you guys so much, and I will catch you guys next time.